one man, one woman marriage. And I don't know why they do, and it doesn't really matter to me necessarily why they do. There are people who live with their parents well into the, for decades after they have reached adulthood. There are college roommates who live together for decades. There are people who are single and they live that way for decades. The fact that they do not receive marriage benefits does not make them second-class citizens. It's simply that a person who lives by himself for 40 years, there's nothing illegal, there's nothing wrong with that. But he does not receive the benefits of marriage because living as a single person, society has stated that does not provide some value to society that society wants to encourage. And that namely is the creation of a lot of healthy children who are going to uphold our society and be taxpayers and support us when we're old for a long time. And so the fact that a single person does not receive marriage benefits isn't because anyone hates single people. It's simply the fact that they are not taking advantage of an incentive that the state has created to encourage people to do something, a particular thing that is a social good. And so I hope that they do not feel like we see them as second-class citizens, because in no way they are. But the fact of the matter is the law has always, and legally done so, treated certain relationships differently than other relationships because they see a meaningful difference between the two. And so we have all sorts of different relationships that are different from a one-man and one-woman relationship. And people should be allowed and not thrown in jail if they choose to participate in those and live differently than I am currently. And that's fine. But the idea that they are second-class citizens and that because of they don't receive the benefits of my particular relationship, that they are not equal under the law is legally, and as the Supreme Court of both the United States and Washington State have found, is simply not true.
The question now is for Mr. Winters along with Mr. Strumble. Mr. Struble, sorry about that. Is the reason for objection to the referendum because it includes gays and lesbians and their domestic partnerships, or would there be such objection if it were specifically for senior citizens alone?
In reviewing the laws of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Supreme Court, in the Supreme Court decision, it was written that essentially the court felt that the objection rested on an abiding prejudice against homosexuals. Is there such a thing in the United States? Of course there is. All of us were taught to disapprove of gay and lesbians as we grew up in the United States. Just as we were taught when I was a boy to disapprove of interracial marriages. Many of the same kinds of objections, predictions, and fears were placed against allowing people to freely marry a person of their choice if it was a person of a different race. The Supreme Court of the United States in 1969 in Loving versus Virginia said that that is an unconstitutional thing because it does not allow people to choose equally. And what we are doing now is to say, yes, indeed, we are seeking marriage equality. We want, and this has never been a secret, we want to be equally protected in our primary relationship with the other adults that we choose to live our lives with. The person that we choose to marry needs to be a person we love, care for, and choose. Now, we've learned a lot about homosexuality in the last several years when it's not been kept a secret, when it's not been, when we've not been subject to widespread persecution, because we have stood up and said, we're here, we belong to the world, we are entitled to equal rights under the law. Now, some churches will not approve of us, some individuals will not approve of us. I don't approve of many couples who have abusive relationships and so forth, but it's not up to me to say that that means that they should not have the right to enter into those relationships, because they are citizens of the United States and should have equal rights under the law. I hope you'll agree with that point of view and approve Referendum 71.
First, let me address a phrase that Roger used several times, prejudice against homosexuals. You know, there's a distinction that I believe Mahatma Gandhi first coined, and we as Christians certainly accept, and that's that you distinguish between the sin and the sinner. It's like a speed limit. You know, if Roger wants to drive 100 miles an hour down the freeway, that doesn't mean I'm prejudiced against Roger. It means I'm prejudiced against his threat to public safety in terms of the actions he takes. Likewise with homosexual conduct, we're prejudiced against it to the effect, or we discriminated against it down through history to the extent that we do not give some kind of special sanction or privileges to conduct that society has long considered to be socially unproductive. You know, George Washington in his first State of the Union address, or annual address as they used to call it in those days, stated that we need to discriminate between liberty and license. In other words, that distinction in this overarching concept of freedom, licentiousness is not to be encouraged, genuine liberty is. And so we need to look at what people do. I mean, we discriminate against half as many people in the prisons as there are in the armed forces of the United States. These people are being discriminated against because society judges that their conduct is morally and socially unproductive. Now, we're not supposing that we should put homosexuals in prison, absolutely not. But we do not, on the other hand, want to sanction them with special privileges that go to marriage and to the conjugal union between husband and wife. Now, as for the specific question here as to senior citizens, you know, this is an old strategy that politicians have been using for decades, and it's a corruption of the democratic process to attach a rider that is really irrelevant to the main issue. This rider of senior citizens was attached in order to give credibility. It's sort of like putting a centerfold, or rather a legitimate article in a Playboy magazine or something to give a certain credibility to pornography. You don't, if they want to bring an issue up or a bill up that has to do with senior citizen privileges and rights, we'd entertain that separately from this question. It should be separated out. This is mainly a question about civil unions' equivalency to marriage and, as I stated before, the virtually certain jump to the mandate for same-sex marriage that the courts will impose.
I've been characterized so far and compared to prisoners, an abomination, disordered, and against natural law. But I do want to talk about seniors. Seniors need protection of domestic partnership. Often seniors who are widowed in their late years find someone that they would like to be with, and they cannot marry them because they cannot afford to marry them. There is a marriage penalty. They may lose their Social Security. My mother, may she rest in peace, was with my father for almost 60 years, and she couldn't have afforded to marry someone in later life, so she chose to live by herself. However, things are different now. This domestic partnership would allow seniors to enjoy the company of someone that they love after their first spouse dies. So this wasn't just tacked on. I'm a senior, and I would want this for me if I were heterosexual. You keep talking about special rights and exemplary rights for homosexuals. No one at this table has asked for any rights that are different from yours. The right to be with the person they love, to be able to care for them, to be able to be secure that when you predecease them, that they will be treated fairly under the law. And that's what this bill does. It has nothing to do with marriage. You gentlemen keep talking about marriage. There is nothing about marriage in this bill. I understand that you might not be comfortable with my relationship with my partner. That is no right to deny me the same rights as you have. I understand that the churches that you belong to condemn as anti-Bible the relationship that I have with my partner. But the First Amendment guarantees separation of church and state. Now, I know Joe has talked about this, but the on other programs, but the First Amendment, which prohibits